Yes, it works. Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you. My name is Swoboda. I'm president of the International Institute for Peace. And I welcome you also for Act.Now. Act.Now is a wonderful organization who started to deal, I think 2 years ago, with the question of refugees, migration. Actually, not. Also had a very good event in Athens, and we had a very good event this September in Kampala, Uganda, to deal with the refugee question, to deal not only from a theoretical point of view and speak about refugees, but speak with refugees, speak with migrants about their experience, their needs, and all the issues they want to raise. And the next one will be in Vienna again at the end of January. Now, why did we make a conference with migrants, with refugees, with politicians, with young leaders in Kampala, Uganda? First of all, in Uganda, because Uganda is one of those places and countries in Africa which is not perhaps inviting, but caring for many, many refugees from neighboring countries. And very often when we in Europe speak about it is impossible to receive so many refugees, we cannot manage that, then sometimes we can look to some of the African countries, for example to Uganda, how they could manage it with a much lower income and lower gross national product. And of course, the whole question of migration and the fear about massive migration from Africa towards Europe is a subject again and again with many medias and of course many politicians. And we wanted, and this is also why we are here tonight, discussing it with real experts, we want to look at the question of development, development aid, development policy, cooperation, and migration from a perspective which is not looking only at the question of migration and looking at it only from the perspective of fear and anxieties, but look into the chances and possibilities and opportunities of a cooperation between Europe and Africa in order to deal with these issues. And there are many issues, of course. One of them is migration. And I'm neither of the opinion migration is horrible and bad and whatever, nor of the opinion migration is good. It's people should emigrate. Yes, it could create opportunities, but it can also create a lot of problems. And therefore we should look at it in a very reasonable way, in a way eye to eye between African countries and European countries. Now there was the summit recently, and the summit, before the summit there were great expectations. We can discuss with participants who were at the summit for Austria, but also inside the Slovenian delegation, if these expectations have been met, if these expectations were too big, and what to do now. Because I always say summit, there's a time before the summit, there's a summit and a time afterwards. Before the summit, there are many discussions and preparations, and there was a civil society forum in Tunis, and there were activities also in Abidjan and in other countries. But now we are after the summit, and we will have to deal with all these questions in a very decent way. And I'm very happy that from the Austrian side, the Secretary of State in the Federal Office who was representing Austria is here, and she's a member of the Parliament, and she will deal with these issues in the future. And we have, of course, experts from Africa itself and a colleague from Slovenia, but that will Rita, who will lead the discussion, will present the participants afterwards. So I'm very happy that you are here. I know that at the same time there's another event on migration from Africa, and there will be an event on, I think, next Monday, also on the question of Africa and what to do now. Anyway, we that is the Institute for Peace, but also Act.Now. We will continue to work on these issues because it's not about having a summit and having a discussion here in a very fragile time before Christmas. Therefore, I'm very grateful that you came in spite of many Christmas punches and you know, I was just walking through the old hospital, AKH, and it's full of people, and I thought they should be here, but okay, you are here, and that's very good. So yes, we will continue to work on it, and would be very happy if you will participate in this kind of work and changing some of the climate, reducing some of the prejudices which are still existing, especially also in our country. Now, we will see a short video, I think, about the conference we had in Kampala, and then Rita will take over and will call us to the podium, and then we will have a discussion there, but of course also with your participation. Again, thank you very much for coming, and please, there's a next year, and the next year Africa-EU relations will be very difficult to manage again, and we will have to continue and we'll do our work in Austria, that we will have a more reasonable perspective in looking to the Africa with less anxiety, less fear, but hopefully with more optimism. Thank you very much for coming.
The word refugee is not synonymous to criminal. The world has let down the refugees because they think when they see refugees, they have seen criminals. To me, a minister responsible for this 1.3 million people, refugees represent, they are victims of a dysfunctional global system.
Whether you're a migrant or a refugee, the only way you can do is ask for at the same boot for asylum, and sometimes with very long periods of having a decision, and this is of course also blocking not only support in the local communities but also effective integration. And as a last point, of course, also we see sometimes a competition on being the worst host.
There are times in history when there was migration from Europe to Africa, in Uganda particularly. During the Second World War, we had tens of thousands of refugees from Poland. Then we also had what was called the Uganda Plan, which was an attempt by the British in the colonial days to resettle Jews to Karamoja. It's just a matter of time. But refugees and migrants, migration happens both ways. For now, it's the other way.
I want to start by really saying migration is a given. We all migrate, whether locally in our villages, in our districts, in our countries, and then globally to other people's whatever. So it is something that we cannot put a stop to. And then now we talk about migration and forced migration. For me, any ordinary type of migration other than forced migration should be to some extent voluntary. Don't I have a right to actually choose to go and live in Spain, in Netherlands for 5 years and then come out?
And I personally don't see how containing migration and investing more in border management and building fences is actually considered as a tool to reduce poverty.
So while we are saying we are not doing it, we are not the ones stopping refugees from coming to Europe, we actually externalize our border and ask other governments to do it for us.
We have a clear distinction between, for example, refugees and economic migrants. Refugees have a very clear status and protection. However, economic migrants not so much, but we know we have a definition, we know there is a distinction between the two.
But for both, no legal routes exist to Europe. So everyone, irrespective of which category you are in, first has to make it to Europe. And we all know and we hear the horrible stories of what it takes to come over the Mediterranean to reach European shore.
The reactionary approach of closing borders
and all that is not going to stop migration. People will move. I don't think anyone would just wake up to just move because you just want to move. There are issues that push people to move. And I think these are the issues that we need to look at addressing.
Human rights of all migrants must be protected. We signed these treaties, all countries, Europe, Africa.
It's essential to make sure we don't get a competition between the newcomers and the ones who are already there, resulting, of course, in scapegoating, in xenophobia, all the negative things we see all over the world. Access to labor market, even if difficult to find a work, and having the possibility, at least the chance, to be able to go to work legally is very important. And I think also no competition on labor rights, right? Once you start to have like a kind of second-rated citizens and the first-rated citizens, this will create tensions on the long term.
From the South African experience, it's quite different. Yes, we also have free movement. We have access to education, access to work and study, but social cohesion is the problem for us. As you all know, we have an issue with xenophobia. We don't see Africans as people who contribute to development. We don't see Africans as people we can learn from. We only see a burden.
What do we mean by discrimination? Discrimination is we are all young people. We don't have enough job in Africa for everybody, but we all went to study together, for example. But why? Because you are the daughter or the son of this ambassador, you are gonna get the job. Why there is no transparency, and why there is no way to study normally and to get a job like a normal citizen. In 20 years, what will be the future of Africa? Which kind of job we will need in Africa? Should we continue following Europe with the technologies they are developing, or we have to do some research ourselves to know what we want in order to create more jobs? Because the solution is creating jobs for young people. I used to have this discussion many times when I came back home with my dad. The first resources of my country, I would say gold. He said, no, it's agriculture. We need to do that. But how can we make agriculture sexy for our young people?
We need to support the youth as they are, like in their initiatives. The youth, especially when it comes to implementation on the ground, use a community-based approach, human-centered design approach. Let them own the projects. Let them be responsible for their own actions.
We went in the community and asked the community what project would be best for the community. And then they told us an education project. So we began an elementary school and a primary school called Duzdar Junior School. When we began, we had 173 children the first term, but now we have 396 children. And we have many refugees from Southern Sudan, from Congo, and from Burundi. Our refugee population amounts to like 25 children. And we are coexisting. We are the same. We don't talk about segregation. We are all Ugandans in our schools. That's what we say.
I've had conversations about technical skills and vocational skills for young people. And I'm going to challenge everybody seated on that panel that some of you have organizations that train young people in different skills, carpentry. In Uganda, one of the famous ones is liquid soap making and such things. But how many of our organizations actually buy from these young people? How many of them train them with the quality enough for your organizations to actually buy? Because the last time I asked the Danish ambassador this question, he said, well, we have procurement policies and blah, 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 quality control. But if you're not training these young people with goods to make products the quality that your offices would actually buy, then why are you doing these trainings? Because ultimately, if you're not buying these products first, who should be buying them? So I think there's also a certain amount of honesty that we need to bring to the conversation of development, as opposed to just channeling money to fuel big SUV cars and go to the field, but to have more money do the actual work as opposed to operational costs. Thank you very much. EU knows what they want from Africa, but does Africa know what they want from the EU? When they give money to support these issues, these situations, they come back and take it back. You know, you have an expert who is being paid $10,000 a month,
but the person who is running the project on the ground is getting $1,000 a month. Why? We shouldn't wait for the EU as Africa. Yeah? We should be able to have countries that can come in. If Uganda is experiencing hunger, don't wait to go and consult China to send rice. Yeah? Isn't there any other country in Africa that has rice, that can donate to Uganda? Why should we wait for Chinese rice? Why should you wait for World Food Program to bring biscuits from America? And then for the AU to promote African unity, you know, promote African unity, Pan-Africanism. Let's have that unity. Let's have that unity that the EU has, you know, and it would be very good if we had a language that would unite us, or a currency that would unite us.
One thing which the African Union knows and our governments do know is, just like we all know, every conflict that happens in Africa, it has become easily predictable. We know when the next war is going to be in the continent. Yeah, we do know, because there are those ingredients that lead to such conflicts. But not much is being done in prevention. To me, I would focus, if African Union can take on leadership to inspire the generation of conflict preventers, not fighters, I think this would be a good opportunity. If we can also come as African Union, maybe the world focuses more on peacekeeping mission. Our governments are struggling. I would focus as a point of focus, as a point of subject of concern. How can we raise young generation of humanitarian leaders? We have, my sister talked about fertile land. Africa dominating over 65% of the world agricultural land, and yet it's the continent starving. This is unacceptable. We can do something. So how can we work towards empowering and engaging this generation? They are young people, they are generation under pressure for change.
Me, what I say is we always have our recommendation, but sometimes we feel like there's no implementation. But what I can say that cannot lose hope, because if we are seeing how as refugees and host community we are trying, we are having youth-led initiative, like what we have heard from my colleagues like Yarit, Ayan, Mira Group and other youth-led initiative. We are trying to see that we can bring change among us youth. So me, I can say that not having our eyes in this big institution like African Union, European Union, but it has to start from us. Here we are, what we are doing, where we are going, to see that we can bring that change. Thank you.
To know about the reality and the truth about migration, but also to garner the perspectives from both Africa, but also from Austria too. Now, before I carry on, may I kindly ask you to put your phones on silent? And I'd also like to introduce first and foremost Victor OCHEN, who will actually provide us with a keynote and enlighten us his perspective on the narrative between, well, the African, between narratives of, thank you can hear me now. So the African youth and then between the narratives of truth and reality. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hello. Do you mind if I stand this side or other side? Anyway, it's okay. Good evening. It's very difficult to tell which one is morning, evening here, because it gets dark at unexpected time. And I am happy to be here. Thank you very much, the moderator, for welcoming me, but above all, the organizer for the event today. And as your leadership has made it possible that we are able to meet here this evening, but also with your colleagues at the Institute of International Institute of Peace. I'm excited and delighted to be given opportunity to get to share my time to learn more about your valuable inputs and dedication and commitment. And most importantly also, it's my joy to get to meet people who are working in different fields. I know we have got colleagues, friends. We are reconnecting in one way or another. Good to see you, my sister. We were in Uganda not so long ago. I can see there Simone from Austrian Development Corporation. That led to the connection to why we are here today. And most of you in your unique capacities, I'm really very delighted, and it's my sincere honor that I have opportunity to come and again be in Vienna for the first time in my lifetime and get to meet wonderful people. Not for the first time, but in so many ways. The subject of the day is not new. Probably we are meeting, being the first time we are meeting, but the subject of the day is not new. And the reasons why we are coming here is not new either. But most importantly, solutions or the subjects or the issues at hand requires new solutions. There are old problems, old challenges, continuing difficulties and hardships, but requires new innovative mindsets, strategies, approaches to make sure we achieve the common goal. I come from Africa. I live in Africa. I came in actually last week. I was in Poland. I connected here. But most importantly, which is the Africa I come from? You all know it. Which is the Africa I want to come from? Is what I'm working for. I guess this is the drive that has brought us together, has inspired us to come together to join hands, but also to reach a point where we know that we are all Africans, regardless whether you are born in Africa or working in Africa, just by the fact that you care and stand and plead and work and strive for Africans. That makes us a family of human race. I was born and raised in Africa in terms of witnessing the hardships of the continent. Like any child, I would say I did not miss in any way any difficulties that any African child went through. Why I'm saying so is, being born in northern Uganda and raised in northern Uganda, a region that for over 20 years, I lived in war. I survived war. I witnessed first-hand accounts of what injustice of conflict means. And in so many ways, I didn't want my life story, my lifetime story to be defined by war. But unavoidably, my experience shapes my thinking today. It shapes my thinking not because I want to scale up war or escalate war or revenge for war, but how to prevent war. When I was a child, I remember when I was 13 years, when I started the peace camp while living in an IDP camp in northern Uganda. And I asked my mom, I said, is this the life everybody else is living in the world? Without food, surviving every day, struggling with their own security, looking for what to eat, surviving on one meal a day for over 7 years. And my mom said, no, this is not. It is unfortunate that you are living it, but it's not the life people are living. But no situation is permanent, she told me. And I want you to promise to me that, as you have seen, this is the terrible life that should not be lived. Promise me that you will never be a reason for this kind of life to continue. Promise me that you'll never pick up the gun. You'll never learn how to shoot a gun. You'll never become a fighter. I made a promise to my mom as a child that I'll never pick up the gun to fight anybody. To date, I've never touched a gun. I do not know how to shoot a gun, and never will I learn how to shoot a gun. It was a promise I made when I was a child. But along the way, walking through hardships and hardships of life, we lost so much. Struggling with our own education, our own security, survival every day. Actually, 2 days ago was a very difficult day in my family life. On the 10th of December, which is International Human Rights Day, It is the day when in 2003, the Lord Resistance Army abducted my own brother, who was 2 years older than me. Unfortunately, has not come back up to now. And every 10th of December is a very powerful day. It's a very difficult day to me, my family, to my neighborhood, because this is when we are reminded with the much injustice we have in the society and how we are being confronted with the decision to make. But we are not alone. My brother is one of the tens of thousands of children who are taken from northern Uganda, and they have never been accounted for. So that means the history of hardships and suffering that forces young people to want to leave home is not gone. They are all still with us. They are still in Africa. It's still happening every day. Our governments are not respected. They are feared. Citizens fear that authorities will come down strong on them because of their stand on human rights issues. Education is too expensive. Police is too brutal. The judicial system is too corrupt, does not deliver justice for the victims. Parliament is all about party. It's all about people. But it's not about them, but not about people. And makes everybody get lost. The question is, as a young man growing and angry and sad, what do you do in that situation? Do you stay or you move? Majority might opt to move. May move outside their countries, outside their region, outside their villages, to the urban setup. Others may take risk to move to Europe, to other places. Why I'm saying so is, all over the continent, from South Africa to East Africa to North Africa, the difficulties resulting from movement remind us of what we are talking about today. I did not know, I did not expect that in my lifetime I would witness slave trade in my lifetime. But it is what we are seeing right now. It is what internationally the media has come up with it clear. Is this new phenomenon or it's been happening? It's been happening before, but how comes the world has been quiet about it? We are grateful that finally it has come to the attention. Are we using that as an opportunity to raise resources, promote our position, or we are using it to avoid such happening again? That's why we are gathering here today, to avoid such situation. I want to tell a story that will help us reflect on what can we do better. How can we make human rights issues a reality, not just by proxy? How can we make human rights issues answering the questions that human rights survivors, abuse survivors are calling for? Through the support from Austrian Development Corporation some times back, which the coordinator is here with us. We did support, with your support, the taxpayers of this country. We did support the repair and reintegration of victims of sexual abuse as a result of war between LRA and the government of Uganda. Such kind of move makes human rights a reality, not just by proxy. In June this year, while we are doing our usual work, for the years that we've been working, we've been doing work to mobilize and engage young people, to prepare them to become actors, as peace builders, game changers in the society, pursuing their leadership career. We don't care your level of education, but we care all about your heart. You can be a leader, whether you're educated or uneducated, in your churches, in your villages, in your community, in your business association. This is what we've been doing, training young people from Burundi, Rwanda, to South Sudan, to Central Africa and Congo and other parts of the continent. But what was very important this year, on 28th of June, I got a call from a young man who told me and said, Victor, I am a South Sudanese. I benefited from your training program 2 years ago. I want to meet with you. And I said, where are you? He said, I'm in Kampala. I met with him, and he told me, this young man told me, that I've got a message from young people in South Sudan who want to meet with you. And I said, yes, they want to meet with me. Are they in the capital? Can I fly to meet with them in Juba? They said no. They are not in the capital. They are in the bush. They are rebels. You have to meet with them. I said, okay, that sounds a bit demanding. I moved with my car to the border of South Sudan. We crossed to South Sudanese border. I found 5 motorcycles waiting for me. I was in the middle motorcycles, with each motorcycle carrying 3 people, a motorist and 2 gunmen. 2 in front, 2 in the back, I was in the middle. They were fully armed. I was being escorted like a president for the first time. Not a prisoner, a president. I went for about 1.5 hours on a motorcycle. We reached a forest. I met a group of 83 young people. When they saw me, they said, Victor, you came. I said, yes, I am here. I said, I can't believe you came. I said, yes, I came. But why did you come? I said, I came because you called me. I said, yes, we called you, but why did you come? I said, okay, this is not a very nice question you're asking. I am here at your invitation, and you are telling me why did I come? I told them, I said, I came because I trusted you. And then they said, yes. And I asked them, why did you call me? They said, we called you because we trusted you. So, mutual trust. When we sat and started talking, they said, we want to tell you something. And I said, how can I help you? And then they said, we have one big request for you. We are not here to demand for power. We are not asking for money. We are not asking for fame. What we are asking is a voice. We need you to give us a voice. You have the platform, you have the connection. We need you to give us a voice. And I asked them, how can I give you the voice? Then they said, why do the world not understand us? We are a politically misunderstood generation. We are here, 83 of us, representing over 3,000 young people. We created a corridor for you from the border to where you came here. You are traveling in the safe corridor because we wanted to meet with you. We are many. We are not representing any tribe, any political party, but we are representing a community of frustrated, misunderstood young generation. And I said, okay, I get it. And then they said, our government calls us rebel. United Nations call us violent extremists. American and Europe call us terrorists. All the 3 want us dead. Nobody loves us except you. You are the only one who loves us, who could come and listen to us. I said, I understand completely. When we were talking, a young man got up, carrying RPG, rocket propelled gun in the back. I think it was inspired by John Rambo, with chains of bullets around his body. Got up and stood in the middle. Got a small megaphone we were talking using. And he said, I'm so happy you came. I'm so happy you have been able to trust us to come here. Why? It's because for the first time we have found somebody who loves us. Why do people hate us so much? When you are coming, you didn't see any school, no hospital, no training centers. It's all suffering, it's all pain. But why do people hate us so much? Why can't people listen to us? He talked and started crying so bitterly. With all the weapons around him, I saw the 19 years old, tall, handsome South Sudanese guy crying and vulnerable in a megaphone. In my heart, I said, imagine if this kid turned his anger into his weapons. How many people would be dead? That's what struck me. As he was crying, I saw his colleagues getting more attentive with their weapons, maybe thinking, since he was so angry, he would go suicidal and then blow all of us. So they were ready. If something goes wrong, maybe they were going to take him off. I went and hugged him. I stood with him. And then we sat. And then I told them that one thing that kept me moving, because you have asked, why did I not fight, even when I had all the reasons to fight, is because I made a commitment that we have seen the suffering, so I don't want to be another source of suffering. I decided to live in the camp as opposed to going to fight. if you agree with me, I want to say, young people, you are here. You have the opportunity to also walk away from the battlefield. I came back to Uganda. 2 months after, I got a call from them. Their leader said, we have the people you met in the bush, 50 leaders, together with 264 followers, have all crossed to Uganda. And I said, what are you doing in Uganda with all the weapons? Said, no. As you told us, we are in Uganda as refugees. We have decided to walk away from the battlefield because of your advice. I didn't say it, but when I got to the bush and I asked them, how did you get my contact? They pulled a brochure which I used in 2015 to launch the Sustainable Development Goals. It had my picture, had the Global Goals logo and everything. So they showed me. And I was, for the first time, happy with my decision to promote Sustainable Development Goal. Because even in the bush, when the rain is on them, they protected that banner to make it clean. And then I went to America and came back, and I met their leader. And then they said, to date, we have got 640 who have come. They are refugees. So our own homegrown, underground, non-political diplomacy is working. If, imagine we maybe by the end of the year we could have succeeded to get 1,000 militia-armed young people out of the bush, we shall have done something. And this is what we can do. This is what we should do. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. As we're discussing on where the young people in the picture of the transition of change we're talking about in Africa. Talk alone, big quotes, will not change anything. I have asked and I said, look into the Mediterranean Sea. In the base of the sea, you will see human skeletons. They are skeletons of African people who have gone through severe heat in the desert to come to Libya, running away from the severe heat of poverty in their own countries, to opt for severe heat in the desert. People who have gone through, who knew that even if they are boarding the boat, they are coming to Europe, there's only 1% chance of survival, 99% chances of death. But they still agreed to go through the storm in the sea because they are running away from the storm of poverty, injustice, intolerance, and division that cripples their development in their own countries. There is so much we can do on land. We appreciate the humanitarian response. That life jacket being given in the sea could have been given on land in a different form, in form of opportunity, capacity development, vocational skills, and other entrepreneurship program. We can do it, but talk alone will not do it. My question is, what next for the young people we are getting from the bush? Are we going to keep them all the time in the camp? The answer is no. If they find life is not easy, they will go back. But now I'm talking to people. Some of you are in position of influence. You have connections. You have resources. We can put up a place, an infrastructure, an architecture for peace, for reconciliation. And this is where we can bring about change. I want to thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Keep up your heart for Africa. Africa is calling. God bless you. Thank you.
We're so delighted to have you here with us today because even your short speech right now was very enlightening, and it is an introduction of what we are going to talk about today in the panel. So if I could kindly ask Victor Ocean, who's a man of action, who is a global advisor to the United Nations, who's a humanitarian, who is also a human rights activist, as well a Nobel Prize nominee for peace, which he also brought in together with the African Network, or the African Initiative Network, right? So please, if you can come onto the stage and have a seat. Thank you. Put your hands together again for him. Thank you. Then next on stage, I would also like to welcome a gentleman called YOUSSOUF DIAKITÉ. He actually lives in Austria, originally from Mali, and he founded an organization for the African students here in Austria. And they were very, very instrumental in speaking for the voice of the diaspora. The youth were actually more adamant in trying to push for change and advocating the use of the diaspora here in Europe, more than the adults are actually. And in addition to that, parallel to that, he's also the chairperson of the African Youth Diaspora Network, I understand, right? So if you could kindly put your hands together for yourself, please come on stage. Thank you. Then I would also like to welcome with us here Duzdar, who is our current Austrian State Secretary for Diversity, Public Services and Diversity. Please come on stage. Then we also have with us today, coming in directly from Slovenia, KALIN, who happens to be a policy advocate, particularly in the field of migration and development. And she represents the Forum for Equitable Development. If you could come on stage and put your hands together for Anna. Then last but not least, I would like to welcome Dr. Swoboda. Most of us are aware of him. He is a political advisor, president of the International Institute for Peace, and a former European Parliament member. If you could put your hands together, please. Then I'd also like to introduce myself. My name is Rita Isiba. I'm the founder of Afropean Partners here in Vienna, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you. So we are familiar with with Socrates, the great philosopher. And he once said that in order to bring on change, you need to actually not fight the old, but you should build on the new. And I think this is very much related to the youth today. We're not just talking about African youth here, we're talking about youth generally around the world. You know, some of us, we may consider our Austrian newly elected chancellor a bit controversial in terms of his age, but he's bringing in some change and new perspectives. And let's see what the new shake-up will bring. So, in this respect, I would like to start off with YOUSSOUF, if I may start off with you. For many youth, Africa is a zone of economic misery. It is because of this mindset that many young people leave their country in search for greener pastures. What role can the diaspora, particularly the African youth in diaspora, adopt to address this matter?
Thank you very much. Rita? Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today. As she said, I'm the chairperson of the African Diaspora Youth Forum, which is about developing business solutions for African diaspora young people and linking them with African countries. And we've been working on some program the last 4 years, and we achieve a lot, helping Africans trying to go back home and creating jobs. And we are doing it through many different ways, like business linkages, business to government meetings, and we work a lot with United Nations and other organizations in Europe, like European Union and ADYFE. We have the support of the Austrian Development Agency as well. And why young people are coming to Europe? Like I used to say, we are looking for something we call hope. Hope is something we need as African young people. Why, personally myself, I want to stay in my own case. I decided to come to Austria to study because I have TV at home in Mali. I know only through a better education I can go and compete with other young people. We talk about globalization, we talk about opportunities. Why the others, why not me? Is the first question I ask myself. So I have to go to learn more and to make sure that I will get a position in where I can give more, I can create more job and more opportunity for my community. And what was interesting when I came to Europe, I was very disappointed because I realized that I had a better life in Africa, however. So I came, I was the only black at my university. It was so difficult, I have to study German, and even having choosing a subject was a big issue. And what I did, I decided to create an association, like she said at the beginning, this student organization. And why? To try to stand together, to make things moving on for ourselves, to creating opportunity for the African, instead staying 10 years for a master program, to do it in 5 years, 4 years. How can we do that? It means we need to look for internship for those young people. We need to look for more opportunity for them to make sure that in the short time they will have a diploma and they can decide either to move to another country or to move back home and creating. And I don't know if you have another question or if I should.
I do. If you could, I didn't want to cut you off, but that was really insightful. I would like to actually you pass on the microphone to Muna, because following up to what YOUSSOUF just mentioned about the students being so active in shaping the narrative, what does the Office for Diversity, Public Service and Digitalisation do to assist such associations and to shape the narrative of migration?
Yeah, to be frank, I mean, as a state secretary, I mean, I'm not officially, formally responsible for youth. It's the Ministry for Family and Youth. Mm-hmm. But of course, I mean, through digitalization, my political fields are very broad. Mm-hmm. And clearly we have cooperated with, had cooperation with young people, for example, in the social media field, where we had an initiative against hate speech and fake news. I mean, it's, my field is very diverse, but even actually I intended to go to Kenya and Tanzania, mm-hmm. but due to the election, I was not able anymore to go there because I was so interested in digital savannah.
Okay.
Yeah, in Kenya and Tanzania, because I mean, what we see over there is that sometimes where we industrialization had maybe not taken place, but they have made one step forward and are already in the middle of digitalization, mm-hmm. which is a very interesting development we are not aware of here in Austria, at least. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So would you be interested then to promote what is happening in Africa in terms of its advancement in digitalization?
Of course, clearly, because I mean, when you see what kind of startups are created in Kenya and what kind of digital initiatives are already existing to solve many problems. I mean, the birth certificate, which is on the smartphone and so on. I mean, these are really good solutions for development and for further development in society. And I feel that we see Africa always as a continent with only problems and conflicts and crises, but we do not see the potentials, and mm-hmm. we are not aware of all these positive developments. Mm-hmm. And this is something which we have to make much more aware.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you're saying that. I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more outreach coming from your departments to shape the narrative about Africa and migration.
I'm probably still 1 week state secretary.
Yes, I know. This is the reason why I said the office.
I will continue as a deputy. Yeah.
Looking forward. If you could kindly pass on the microphone to Dr. Swoboda. You are the president for the International Institute for Peace, and I was just wondering how you promote non-violent conflict resolution here in Austria from the perspective of Africa, because usually the conflicts are within ethnic groups, which a lot of Europeans can't really identify with. So it'd be very interesting to find out what the Institute has done so far.
Well, not so much the Institute. Stephanie, who is our director, and myself, gave it a bit new push in because we got the idea also from Act.Now, which is dealing with the refugee issue. And of course, as a member of European Parliament, I visited several African countries and we dealt with many issues. I think one of the most important things is, of course, development in the countries, economic and social development. I particularly say, don't say development aid, because it should be more development cooperation, should be giving some of the impetus. Fight against corruption is a big issue, and corruption very often is an element of close connection, bad connection, but close connection between European or American or even Brazilian, if you think about the former Portuguese colonies, or Chinese companies and locals, oligarchs, local families. We have now the big discussion in South Africa about the Gupta family. We have still, if you look to Congo, for example, the question of how many illegal and legal, but nevertheless bad extraction of rare materials, rare earth, so is promoting corruption. So we have to see this kind of linkage. That, for example, we promote electric cars, and electric cars very often they use the batteries, and for the batteries we use some of the materials and rare earth found in Africa, which is a good thing. But if it is organized in a way where it is not to the benefit of the people living there, like also with oil and gas and other materials, primary materials, then it is not good. Then we have to change. And our institute and our activities we want to promote now in the next months and next years is to inform our public about that connection. Okay. Because they only see, you know, these Africans, they always have the tribal conflicts, and they always have this kind of wars. They are still primitive in some way. I was, many years ago, was in Angola, and I didn't know much about Angola, besides that there was a war going on for many, many years. But then you saw Angola is one of the richest countries in this world. With diamonds and gold and also agriculture, as was mentioned also in the movie and also by Victor. And then you see the companies, you know, companies and states finance different groups to fight each other.
I would like to actually pass on now to Victor, just to...
Do you have a microphone, I think?
Do you? Oh, perfect. So we'll leave it on that side. Now, following to Dr. Swoboda's statement that, you know, we need to actually in Africa shape our own narrative. We need to blow our own trumpet and not allow others to do so. Because clearly there is a misconception about Africa. For many of us Africans here, we kind of have integrated in a way where we don't even see it anymore. So you coming as a visitor almost, so to speak, advise us in what can be done in order to shape the narrative.
Well, can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I don't come as an expert. I come in as just somebody sharing the practical experience of what's going on we're doing locally. I think the biggest challenge in African reality is leadership. Our political leadership has got so much responsibility to blame, and, you know, in a way that the root causes of all these injustices and suffering and move and lack of development is just about the challenge, the declining legitimacy in democracy. If you check right now, I would say African democracies are having a back roll, is facing a back roll where politically everyone was working towards a society where democracy is a way of power transfer, is a way of leading the country. But leaders in power are changing constitution at best suitable for themselves. That hurts the new age of leaders. Secondly, the tribal nature of politics in Africa makes it so difficult for politics of inclusion. if you're to do like the gene test of leadership, political leadership, you'll find from ministers to the commissioners belongs to one family, if you're to do the gene test. So we have a generation that is under pressure for change. And they have waited for change for too long. Most of them have taken up on their own to impose change. But this generation needs to be able to be guided, be able to shape, influence the pace of change towards the values of Pan-Africanism as stipulated in our constitution, based on transparency, leadership of integrity, inclusion, fight against corruption, and all these are the kind of leadership of unity and reconciliation. Most of us, we have embraced leadership, embraced the colonial strategies, and they're using it, the divide and rule concept, to destroy their own countries right now. They brutalize their own people today, and then they blame it on colonial powers. This is wrong. 50 years down the road, through independence, we shouldn't be looking so much from outside world. We should be looking more from within. But the problem is, political leadership is all about them. It's all about power. It's all about parties. It's not about, actually, political parties in Africa are more powerful than the parliament. And that's really where we go wrong, because a president comes to power, is focused, how can I maintain our power grips, leadership and all this for all these years, without what can I do to nurture the new age of inclusive leaders, people who are going to champion the cause of unity based on their equal opportunities, and in a way passing on the right message to the young people. But again, we are hopeful that dictatorship is falling, is crumbling quicker. We hope it goes quicker and we all get the dictators out of power.
Thank you very much, Victor. Now, Victor touched the subject of leadership, and I understand that you was at the recent AU-EU summit in Côte d'Ivoire. In your opinion, how do you believe that the leaders from both continents collaborated to bring on change?
Thank you for inviting me here and for the question. Yes, I was at the summit in Abidjan. Actually, I was part of the official Slovene delegation, and I'm a member of the civil society. So I do have to say that I'm very happy that my government is open enough to include civil society into the delegation, because actually, even though civil society is one of the partners or one of the stakeholders of the partnership, they were actually not allowed into the summit at the end. And this used to be the practice in the past. Until the end, it seemed that they would be able to enter, but unfortunately, this did not happen. And we're talking about 5 minutes to prepare or to talk about the declaration that the civil society adopted in Tunis in July. Now, so what does that mean? For a partnership that is supposed to be people-centered, because that is what the strategy or the European-African partnership is supposed to be, I guess not having civil society in means that it's not people-centered. The youth, which is the topic of today, actually the last moment was allowed in. But not so much the youth organizations that actually a month before the summit got the opportunity to again prepare their own declaration. They got, I think, about again 4 minutes, one representative from the EU side and one from the African side, but rather the youth plug-in initiative. But this was a little bit more, not so much supported by the youth organizations themselves, but rather the youth was chosen from EU institutions and AU institutions. So in other words, in my view, this was very much decision makers summit, not a people summit. But from my point of view, what was inspiring in a way, even though I did not really feel inspired by the summit, I must say, is that the relationship seems to be changing a little bit, in the sense that, from my experience, the EU usually comes and says, EU is the biggest donor. I think this narrative is slightly changing, because there was a clear, I would say, unity among African leaders in saying, we want a more equal partnership. And I think this is really the step in the right direction. They were saying, we want African solutions to African problems. And there seemed to be a little bit of not really happiness from the EU side that, they're not looking for European solutions. So I think this is really good. And the question is, where is it coming from? I mean, something that was repeatedly stated was that EU is not the only partner in Africa. But also something that was stated is and you know, I'm thinking here about China, let's say, yeah? But no, there was also a clear statement, we want to become the new China. We want to be the ones that are bringing solutions to the world. So I think there's a switch there. But of course, you know, I think it is crucial, you know, to come back to the questions that, you know, I think we need to talk things that are interrelated. Yes, leadership, but what about corruption? What about illicit capital flows? You know, what is development cooperation? Yes, if it's not cooperation, is it really, do we actually gain more out of it than you know, we sort of give? So I think there are a lot of questions that need to be discussed, and not only how leaders were talking to one another, but how do all the stakeholders sort of come into the picture?
Thank you very much. Now we begin again with you, YOUSSOUF. Now, to continue the thread of the conversation, we spoke about leadership, we touched the subject of corruption, and tying this with migration, we know that one of the main reasons why people are leaving their home is to find better opportunities, also due to climate change as well. Now, what is your take in this? What is your take on African industrialization? What can we do here in Austria to support this?
Thank you very much again. I'm very happy that Anna started talking about the plugin initiative. I didn't agree with you. It was really representative of the young people because my organization was part of it. And it was the European Youth Forum, the Pan-African Youth Union, and the Diaspora Network, which is my network. And we had a youth summit 2 months ago in Abidjan first. And among these 150 young people, we received about 7,000 applications. And among these 7,000, we decided to have the 36 young people. And I had the privilege to lead the business cluster. And I think we are really well represented. We represent all the African, European, and diaspora communities. Of course, the civil society forum was something completely different, and we had the possibility to enter and attend all the meetings. And we are very happy because at the end of the meeting, I was personally not happy because I was expecting more. Of course, more decision-making. But the more interesting which happened this year was this plugin initiative. Because we worked 5 weeks, you know. We stayed 3 weeks in Brussels. We've met all the decision-makers, all the institutions, to see the existing project and to see how we can strengthen the collaboration between Africa and Europe as well. And then we went to the African Union, and we stayed 10 days there. We were attending a lot of activities, meeting a lot of stakeholders as well. And at the end, our duty was to produce the youth agenda, which was supposed to be a document for the next 3 years, because the head of state meeting is each 3 years. You know, this was like this will be the bridge between the past forum, which happened last week, and the upcoming forum in 3 years. And we work on 6 cluster, different group of 6 young people to come to your occasion. The first one was education and skills. Education and skill was the most important to us. And the focus for us to change the narrative was as well to see the common point between Africa and Europe and how we can take from there to go up, you know, to scale up both sides. And skill development, after meeting all the stakeholders, we got to know that there is an issue of competencies, both sides. You know, how can we take in consideration the non-formal competencies and to add it to the value, to revalue it and to make sure that the person can get a job after. And the second most important point in this regard was to guarantee a quality and inclusive education for everybody, young people. Because without education, you cannot get a job. Why I'm linking to job? Because the job and business and job creation was the second cluster. I was in charge of it myself. We had the chance, the opportunity to meet the European Development Bank to see how we can find a solution. You know, they used to fund a lot of microfinance in a big organization, and the young people are not taking any advantage of it because we don't have any guarantee. If I want, for example, I'm living for example, in a rural area in Mali, where I'm coming from, I have no access to credit. Although that European Union, the external investment program, is investing 400 billion the next year to the cooperation Africa-Europe. How can the young people as well having some credit or grant or whatever to be able to create their own jobs? You know, was one of the main questions. And we came with some solution, which will be, for example, creating a window, you know, where the young people can apply just for the feasibility study, building some hubs in Europe and Africa, focusing on good practices sharing, you know, for rural side, both sides as well. And we came as well with the idea which I will want to promote as well locally, which is to have a think tank. Since the migration crisis started in Austria, they never gave the opportunity to the diaspora to be one of the key role players. We invite us for a discussion, but we are not part of the decision making. Why? Which is a local discussion we can have here. It should be interesting to involve us. Involving means not only inviting you for a discussion, but giving you a means as well to do the work. I know the diaspora can play a key role, you know, in this regard, you know, in terms of capacity building, know-how transfer, even awareness raising to our people. I don't know if you know, but we are the one funding, you know, our family there, and I'm sure that was part of our money we are sending will be used to, you know, to sponsor one or two persons as well. Awareness raising is very important. The narrative can be changed only through those. And the key area we decided as well will be to change the nature of collaboration between Africa and Europe, because the framework they are using so far is not fair. It's not fair because Africa is not the continent where you can come to take the raw material and go. You have to pay for it. We need to give the means to the continent to develop those themselves. And we focus on connectivities. I'm very happy that Madam Mona is here. Connectivity will be the key factor to boost development in the rural area in Africa, because we've been talking about value chain development. Without connectivities, without infrastructures, we cannot reach those points. And then we continue to governance. How can we avoid to make the same mistake like Europe? Is through e-governance. And we work a lot through e-governance to see how Africa can really take some advantage of it and make sure that we're starting having a transparent election, we're starting having, you know, a real way to do election and vote without thinking about conflict or somebody did something wrong and whatever. This point was very important to us, because the election is like the early warming stage for a conflict in Africa. Once the elections are not going well, nothing is going well in the different countries. How can we link those two? Unfortunately, they've canceled the peace and security sessions. I don't know the decision they are taking there. And locally, it's important to me, once again, to come back. We, as the diaspora, we've been involving in many activities the last 4 or 5 years in Europe and at the European level, as well as in Africa as well. But we never had the opportunities to have an institutions and to do our work properly. It's all about discussion, but we need to become an institution to play a key role in this thing. Only becoming an institution will give you a means to support projects and carry programs. We can look at countries like Paris, look at Forum, which is a diaspora organization, and they are the one bringing most of the development projects to Africa because they have the infrastructures for that. And I'm happy you are here. I think you will give us some solution about it as well, and how we will see the future without you at your position. And the last point I want to add is it is time really to invest in young people in Africa, rural area and all, through what we call TVET, the training and vocational educational training. Training 2 times here. And TV, why TV? Sorry, it's very important because Africa need to be able to build its own product and to sell it locally. This is the only way to create value. And Austria is one of the best example in the world in this regard, you know, TV area. But how many exchange programs do we have with Africa? If you want me to stay in a rural area in Africa, you don't need to give me only peace, but you need to give me means to create value, to create job for myself. And to add to the project he has, we've been talking, is to have this part of TVET, you know, vocational training, you know, and make sure that they have the equipment and the technologies to become a good plumbing, to do the work there. We can create really value in the area. And without that, we cannot really stop the migration to Europe.
Thank you very much, Youssouf. If you could pass it on to Mina, thank you. Youssouf's answer was very loaded, very insightful and informative. Much of it I actually have to also agree with too. What can, you know, the Austrian state do in its capacity to prevent migration rather than trying to build up the walls? I know this is not within your department, but you do have an oversight internally in how things run. So I'm just wondering, because Austria, one of the greatest materials that Austria has, raw materials that they have, is knowledge. We are very, very strong in knowledge. So perhaps knowledge, exporting know-how and skills development to African countries and assisting with, or maybe like building up an infrastructure to support the diaspora as well as an agent between both continents could also be a solution that can be integrated. Is it pragmatic? I don't know. What do you think?
Of course it's pragmatic, and this was the subject we tackled in the summit, and was tackled by almost every country.
Okay.
What can we do to, especially in reference to young people, how can we create more prospects to young people in Africa? And this is why I appreciated a lot that for the first time this youth council took place, and there were 120 participants, and as Youssouf said, about 7,000 applications, and at the end there were 36 fellows which were chosen to continue youth projects, to continue this youth agenda. So I mean, I felt this is a good and a new thing to try to be to have a sustainable policy, and not just the heads of states are coming every 3 years together in a summit without a clear or concrete outcome. And this is what I liked so much was first of all that the representative of the youth organizations there were very self-confident, and they were really demanding and asking for action. And I mean, someone could feel that they are not accepting no longer such a situation in their countries where they feel that the head of states are not doing enough to give them prospects. And I mean, this is why they took a decision finally to have the 6 clusters, and one of the clusters was education. Education, and what how do we contribute as Austria? We have a very good vocational training system in Austria, and I would not say export it, but we implement it in some African countries. Or we are supporting vocational training in Burkina Faso, in Ethiopia, and I feel this is what we are talking about, know-how, how we can support with projects young people in order they have a professional educational experience, in order they have much more prospects in their country. I mean, we have one big water project in Uganda, Austria, and I mean, as far as I understood, 2 million are benefiting from this water project. And it was interesting for me because I met the head of state in Uganda, and there was the foreign ministry who told me that he also benefited from this water project. And this was good to hear that, I mean, when you invest in some projects that there is a positive outcome. And for me, the conclusion from this summit is clearly that there is an understanding, a political understanding, that the cooperation has to be deepened. And because now the summit is taking place for about 17 years, and it was the 5th summit, and there was this say and this reputation, okay, they are coming, are producing declaration, then they are going back, and this was it. And but there was I felt that it was this time different, although I had no comparison. But first of all, you had everyone from the EU institutions present. Federica Mogherini was there, Juncker was there, the President of the European Parliament was there, and you had so many head of states there. And they showed that it's so important for them to come together. And what you said was completely true, that what was asked was to talk to each other on the same level and not to have this imbalance, not to have this you're a donor and we are just doing what you would like. And I mean, this trying to change the way of cooperation, to define a new cooperation, a new partnership, was really a big issue over there, and it was said by everyone. And I felt that with the fact that we had this youth council, with the fact that we as well adopted there an action plan for the first time, was adopted by all states over there against the slavery in Libya, and it was really an action plan saying that we have to liberate now those 3,800 persons who are held in slavery. And they started already with these measures. So I felt, I mean, they tried to be really to set actions. Yeah, it should not be anymore a summit where you just produce blah blah, but where you really think, where you wonder how can we strengthen a real cooperation and a real dialogue on all different levels. On the youth level, on a level with parliamentarians, on a level of civil society. And of course you're right that civil society was not accepted and respected as they should have been. But I felt nevertheless that it was already a good step with this youth council, and that they have the duty or the task now to come up with projects, with concrete projects.
Thank you very much. For the interest of time, because I would really like the audience also to join in the conversation as well, the next question that I'm going to pose should be very snappy, if that's okay. Now, on to Dr. Swoboda. Now, Bruno spoke about partnership. And we are aware that since this year, March, there's been a partnership, an official partnership policy between the African Union and the European Union. What is that actually about?
Well, there are different interpretations. For some, it's just a partnership to avoid migration, and for others, it's partnership to have more equal, or give an opportunity to Africa to catch up, at least in some element, and to help them. And of course, I can only repeat what a European head of state, President Macron, said, that he said, we would like the African Union to be stronger, to have a partner in the African Union. Because it's strange, of course, Europe has its deficiencies, and we complain about why on many issues European Union is so weak. But if we compare it with the African Union as a spokesman for Africa, it is very weak as well, including even much stronger tolerance about dictatorship and human rights violation than it is in Europe. Also, we have our problems, but I think the African Union, and if we could help them, not only financially, but in other ways, it would be very important. And one element, to make it short, is of course the diaspora. I think the diaspora could be a bridge inside this partnership and should be promoted in that sense. Of course, Austria has very difficulty with its own diaspora, because when we pushed out, our forebears, pushed out especially the Jewish people outside, and we didn't call them back. Now, we are proud about several Nobel Prizes given to Austrians, but these Austrians who got the Nobel Prize were pushed out during the Second or before the Second World War, and all of a sudden, when they get the prize, they're Austrians. But that's another issue. But so at least the diaspora, the African diaspora, for example, they should really be used as a bridge in that partnership. On many of these elements, we can do it, not in promoting migration, but in promoting cooperation, promoting development. I think that's the core of the partnership, is to learn from our experience, not to imitate it. To learn from our experience, our positive experience, our failures and mistakes. There we can be frank and open, and then the countries in Africa have to decide what to take for their own development. That's partnership. It's not you know, coming from above, as Mona said, but really as a partner, eye to eye.
Thank you very much. If you could pick up the microphone, Victor, the next question comes to you. So I know that we are all common and we all agree that education is the way forward. Also, of course, peace building and conflict resolution. But the interesting thing is this. If I can give you an example with Kenya, there has been a couple of European countries to build on the capacity of medical experts in various African countries. And in Kenya, for example, it has a population of 43 million people, but only 15 oncologists, which are specialists for cancer, only 15 for a population of 43 million. Now, the reason why it's so little is because people get educated, but then they leave.
Yeah.
How can you stem the brain drain? What is your idea behind this?
Yeah, it still relates to what the previous speakers talked about in terms of we are talking about cooperation and partnerships and in all these areas of countering the movement and all that. But I wish in our partnership with the European Union and United States and all that, we are able to be open to tell our leaders that what we are seeing in Libya is a manifestation of what is happening in the countries. All over the continent, African countries are full of prisons, and prisons are full of young people. Who are these young people? They are people who stand up for their rights. They are people who disagree with their government. They want to have their say. Their voices are not heard. And above all, out of poverty, out of desperation, either you are arrested and you go to prison, or you rebel against the government, or you leave the country. So in a way, young people leaving the countries, their countries, the question should be asked, why is that African leaders are silent about it? It's a reason for them. If they see the more they go out of the country, the better for them. That's why they are quiet about it. And they would want to see them go more so that there's less political pressure. But we are saying slavery is not only in Libya, it's back home in our countries. We have seen government suppressing civil society, suppressing media, suppressing opposition. If you cannot speak in your own country, you are a slave. There's nothing else. So in terms of what education, in terms of how do we avoid the brain drain and all that, typical of my country, Uganda, currently, we have had medical doctors striking for 3 weeks because the members of parliament are paid almost $10,000 a month, and a medical doctor is paid less than $1,000 a month. Look at the variance. So in a way, politics has replaced cash crops that used to make everybody rich, coffee production, cotton production, tea production. Politics has replaced this. So for you to be rich in Africa, you have to join politics. And that means you join politics, you go into corruption and all these kind of things. And then it comes into what other opportunities can we use home? Can we get ways of saying we make homegrown alternatives and inspire them that the time is now? Are we ready to run out of the continent and leave it to the hand of political predators? Or we are ready to stand up and mobilize ourselves politically and demand for change, but of course in a non-violent way, in a peaceful way. They can be the powerful, rich, wealthy one in power, but we have the advantage of numbers. We can challenge that, we can bring that. So in a way, people ask me, you travel out of Africa all the time, you keep going and coming back. What have you forgotten within Africa that you keep coming back? Why don't you stay in Europe and America where life is better? I told them, no, if it's about war in Africa, that's why I should stay in Africa, because war displaced us for too long, and this is the time that we should work as a new generation to displace war from Africa and make a continent that is livable. And that's what we should do. That's the mentality. We should be driven by our resilience, our humility and responsibility to stand up and work for the continent we want, as opposed to seeking for a better life out of the continent. We can make that happen home. We are blessed, we should take advantage of that, but of course stand up to challenge the reality, but with love, Tell truth to power, but tell it with respect. That's what we should do.
Thank you. Anna, you were in the foreign ministry of Slovenia, and then you went into civil society because you believe that you can make more of a change. So you're also instrumental in shaping policies. And we know that this year, or was it even last year, that Slovenia brought out the Alien Act. This act says that people are no longer allowed to migrate unless they're refugees. How does the country distinguish between that, if they are in danger or not? Is it feasible? Is it pragmatic?
Just one tiny, I would say, or maybe correction is not the right word. I'm not sure if I can make more of a difference or change now that I'm part of the civil society. Okay. I think I could have been able to make more of a change as part of the ministry. But anyhow, that's another story altogether. Actually, the act, the way it goes is that you can, if the majority of the parliament decides that enough people are coming into Slovenia that it represents a threat to Slovenia, then they can stop people from entering Slovenia. So it's an arbitrary decision of what is too much. And of course, it's in violation of numerous international laws. The civil society really stuck together and said, this is not possible. There was quite a lot of, it was actually advocacy mainly done, because we thought that, if we bring this into the public, it's going to get worse because of the discourse around migration, which is very negative. And we did not succeed actually in changing that. But, it's a difficult question. I think something that happened with 2015 with this huge number of people coming into Europe is that we actually started dividing, the division obviously exists from before. People into different categories of migrants. Now, everybody's a migrant, right? Refugees are migrants, one of the categories of migrants. But now we're talking about refugees and migrants as if they're two separate groups. And one is a subcategory of the other, yeah? But personally, I do have an issue with saying, you are what we call, I think when we talk about migrants, people usually allude to economic migrants. But the problem is that today, we have this category of mixed migration where it's very difficult to tell what is the reason why people are migrating. It can be, like you already mentioned, environmental migrants. You can be an environmental migrant, you move from one part, and you can even be an internal migrant or, displaced person. And then all of a sudden, because there you cannot have opportunities, you become what is perceived as economic migrant. So the question is, in a world which is so complex, how can we so easily give titles to people? And I think this is definitely one of the discourses that needs to be tackled, needs to be dealt with. Also, the question is somebody that is fleeing war, has a better reason to go than not having hope? We're saying this is okay, so it's okay when you're fleeing from war, but it's not okay when you actually don't have any hope for the future. Then you have to stay and suffer. And I'm not saying which is better, but I'm just saying that we're really simplifying what is okay and what is not okay. And the main point, of course, is that most people that flee, they flee from war, from terror, from poverty, so the fear of actually people coming here and this fear of terror, of us versus the others, it's something that is, I think it's deeply within us, simply because, we want to feel safe, and I'm not talking about security from the conventional perception, but we want to feel safe as persons. So it's very easily played on our psyche. And this is what politics is doing. It's playing us versus the others. So I think it can be changed, but I think it's a very long process, and it needs to be, I think, actually also top-down, but again, with the participation of everybody.
Thank you very much. On that note, thank you very much. On that note, I would like to open the floor. Because I believe that there's a lot coming from this audience. I'll start off with 3 questions, And we'll start from the front and work our way towards the end. Now you put your hand. Yes, please. Okay. If you just introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Gertrude Oehlmark. I'm here simply of private interest because I'm interested. And I have one question. Ms. KALIN, you mentioned that the Africans want African solutions and not European solutions. So my question is, what are African solutions to African problems, and in which way do they differ from EU solutions?
Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Louise. Actually, it's not a question, I just wanted to add something. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Victor OCHEN, for being here. Victor was actually one of our keynote speakers in northern Uganda recently, a conference that we organized. Mine is just to add that there is quite a lot of work that needs to be done still in post-conflict societies, because to tell you the truth, there is a lot of potential that I saw in northern Uganda especially, and there's so much hunger, you know, for knowledge and all that. So for us in this room who are able to support small initiatives like what Victor is doing and what we are doing at GAICO. At GAICO, what we do is that we try to organize annual conferences whereby we motivate, we inspire, and start to see transformations in the lives of young people. Mm-hmm. And to add on to that, YOUSSOUF, it would be very interesting to also look at youth from post-conflict societies, you know, with your idea of skills. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If I could have someone at the, yes, the lady here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kerstin Donal. I'm a social entrepreneur, and as a social entrepreneur, I'm very happy to confirm that there's a lot of movement in Africa, in African countries, especially Uganda. I've seen a lot of good projects. Mm-hmm. My perspective is tourism, and I would like to know if there are any perspectives, inputs from your sides, how tourism can actually contribute to promote actually what's going on in Africa with the youth and the good products that are there, and also for changing the narrative and telling the good stories.
Thank you so much. Okay, so was that directed to anyone particularly, or is that an open question? Thank you. So the first one was to you, Anna. I believe it was about what is the solution for Africans proposed by Africans.
Thank you. I'm not really sure if I'm the right person to answer that question, since, you know, obviously I am European. But I mean,
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
well,
I mean, from my experience, we work actually. My organization works in Uganda with refugees, with refugee-led organizations, and I think, I mean, in my point of view, this is definitely what should be done. You know, the beneficiaries are the ones that need to be included, and they're the ones that know, you know, let's say in the case of refugees, they're the ones that know what are their needs. They're the ones to assess what obstacles they have in obtaining, you know, a livelihood in their countries. So of course they need to be part, basically what you're saying, they need to be part of the solution. So I don't think it's really a question of African versus European, but just simply making sure that the local context, the people that are affected are the ones that are included in shaping the solutions. I think that would be the key.
Thank you very much.
If I may add something on that, I think it's rather disturbing that people always say African solution to African problems. I know this is a narrative that has always been marketed so much by my African leaders, which I find it ridiculous, because when you ask them, so what solutions are they bringing to address the African problems? There's none. Their solution is silence. Their solution is solidarity in crimes. Their solution is how good Mugabe was to them, even if he couldn't even stay awake for any more minutes. Their solution is, what can you not tell the other president who's brutalizing the next, you know, in the neighboring countries? So this is the African solution to African problem, which is totally wrong. I think we shouldn't work for African solution to African problems. We should work for human solution to human problems. Whether in Africa, whether everywhere, the human rights of Africans are just as the same as human rights of Europeans. It shouldn't be an African affair, it should be a human right issues. If it's being violated, it should be tackled by all, not these colonial excuses where they brutalize and kill their people now, and then they blame Europeans for that. For what? Well, Europe has their own issues to answer in one way or another, but really, when we deprive our own people today, and we're denying opportunity for education, we're making it too expensive to afford. In my country, people are dying of malaria, which it takes $5 to treat. In the world of today, people cannot afford $5 to treat malaria. Something is wrong. Look at the infrastructure, the roads, and all these kind of things. Corruption supersedes everything. Impunity and all the things cripples development. People, actually, many young Africans prefer audience of the foreign leaders, not African leaders.
Okay. Okay.
You wanted to add?
I would like to add something about African perspective. I have the priority, I'm African.
The tourism will come straight after.
Positive discrimination, okay.
The African solution, we've been talking a lot about it, it's true, but we need to understand that Africa is not alone in Africa. We are with European and Chinese nowadays. We've been working the last, not working, we've been, the last 400 years, the first partners Africa never had was Europe. But nothing happened in Africa. What is happening is only the raw material taken from Africa and use it in Europe. In the last 20 years, China came to Africa. I'm sure many people here have been in Kigali or in Addis Ababa recently. You can see the change in terms of infrastructures. I'm not saying that is good, but you can see they have connectivities. They are creating a lot of jobs right now. To me, the African solution will be really to invite a new partnership with Europe, because the way the partnership is done is not fair and it is not the way it should be. I can't condemn always the African leaders. In terms of governance now, we had issues in Gambia, but did you see the proactivities of the African Union? They achieved to manage the case there. And we had now issues in Togo. The president of the African Union, Alpha Condé, the president of Guinea, is the one dealing with the diaspora, Togolese diaspora, trying to bring a peace back in the country. But what happened during the last 400 years is the question. No infrastructure. Europe is really fair with Africa. Do they want really to let Africa developing their own market, selling? This is the question. We can compare with China, seriously, and see the difference. 400 years and 20 years difference.
I would like now for us to go on to the second question so we can allow the audience also to have an input. The second question was in regards to tourism, using tourism as an instrument. Would you like to respond to that?
Still two questions. First of all, tourism. I think, again, you have to learn, and in economic field, I want to defend against my friend Victor, the expression African solution. You have to define what is good for your own country, not what is good for somebody else. And of course you can have different ways, but Botswana is one of the ways which I would say in development and tourism in a relatively decent way. It is expensive, yes, but Europeans and Americans can pay and should pay. But it is limited in some way, yes. Because if we see, for example, in Europe, Barcelona, but many other countries, maybe also sometimes in Vienna, people say it's too much, I don't feel at home anymore, because it's overflowed with tourism, and the city is defined not by the people who live, but by some people who come in. Also the whole debate about, this renting for flats and so on. So I think there are some examples in Africa, and it's not everything perfect in Botswana, but I liked it very much because, I had to pay, but it was decent, and I had good relationship, and I thought that this country is trying to preserve its characteristics in spite of tourism. And that's, I think, the main element. And on the other hand, you know, two elements, because I think that's very important.
If
on
we
this
can keep it short.
Yeah, but this African issue is, I think, is very important, and you deserve an answer. Now, China is coming, was mentioned. Is it good that quite a lot of land is just given to China for the production of things which are serving Chinese population? Or was it good for Europeans to say, okay, you have to promote exports, for example, raw materials, forget about agriculture. And then the people in the country have not enough food for themselves. So that is, I think, maybe African solution is not the best expression, it's local solution. Solutions for where the people who live there primarily are served, and then maybe some others.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take 3 more questions, please. The gentleman at the back. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Farhan Raza. I'm from Pakistan. I'm also a refugee here. I'm from Austria, being accepted. Anyway, it took long. Yes, but my question, I'm a social and cultural anthropologist, and I'm also working for a refugee project in the Austrian school system. It's more related to more multilingualism. Anyways, that's something else, but my question is, as being mentioned that from the summit, was that from European side to strengthen the African Union. My point is that already, as the Victor has mentioned, the people, the leaders who are already corrupt, and recently we have read about Robert Mugabe, about his exclusion from the persecution, and then there was a statement in a newspaper, I think it was Guardian or another one, that why should Robert Mugabe would be worried about the capital, because the capital is in the Swiss banks.
What is actually the question?
The
Sorry.
question is that what the Union or the African Union and European Union from the European side came to strengthen the African Union, as Victor mentioned, and also the YOUSSOUF, Mr. YOUSSOUF and Mr. Victor, they both mentioned, to strengthen again the politicians or to strengthen against the institutions, and then again came from the Chinese perspective. Like I can give my country's example from the CPEC, that they give not a single penny to the Pakistani government, but they invested all the financing in the projects, in the infrastructure. So whether it will be the cooperation for European Union with a new declaration, with a new cooperation, new strategy, again to strengthen the corrupt leaders or the institutions.
Thank you very much. To the lady here at the back.
Thank you, Otalia Sacco, and I'm private here. Just to come back to the question of leadership and our African leaders, we have to say one thing, we have to respect them, and they are not all corrupt, they are not all dictators. And we have seen, like, for few days, Nana Akufo from Ghana, who made a real good speech, a leadership speech, sorry. So just want to bring that. And also, I know, and I can say, I'm not, but Pan-Africanism, Africa is 44 countries, and we have 2 states who are not really recognized. So, and my question is to YOUSSOUF and to Victor, and delighted to meet you here. To what extent you think the African youth, but also the diaspora included, are assessing root causes, mapping needs, but also define actions plan? It's not always easy, and I think, Victor, you agree with that. In some situations, youth are not able to really do that. And before taking action, sometimes you have to know the big picture, and I think it's not so quite easy. And 54 countries, how do you do that? from your part and to Diaspora.
Thank you. I'll take one more question. The lady here at the front.
Hi, my name is Trinity, and I'm an Austrian Ugandan, and I just moved here 2 years ago. And I wanted to ask about something that Mrs. Duzdar said about digitalization and what the youth in Africa can do, because I think one of the biggest problems is the segregation between the affluent and the everyday person within Africa. Growing up in Uganda, I never saw all the struggles that many other fellow Ugandans went through simply because I was born on the lucky side. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, what can we do as the youth through maybe digitalization as awareness, and how can we help, how can we better the African youth?
Thank you very much. So the first question was in regards to how we can sanction corrupt leaders and institutions. Who would like to answer that?
You have the mic here?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It comes back to what cooperations do we have between the continents. In fact, it's a very good discussion going on right now in Uganda, that whereas we are complaining of a president that has stayed in power forever, who facilitated that to happen? And the root also comes to Europe, because people are saying that while he was in the bush leading operations, over 1 million people being killed, his families were here in Europe, going through education, everything. The question then came is, what role are Europeans playing in an act of rebellion back home in Africa? Because if we have opportunity where fighters bring their families to be safe, and they command a very vicious operation where women being raped, children being killed, and all these kind of things, they are safe, and then they come to power. So cooperation between this is a clear accountability framework that should be given to the new generation of African leaders. We need a mutual engagement between Europe and Africa, and that while we are moving forward, we have to agree on what are the benchmarks of accountability that should be not compromised at any level. Because if stolen money from Africa is being kept in Europe, Europe is part of what's going in Africa. Mm-hmm. And then it comes back to, let's not, I don't want to make it a problem that China's presence in Africa is a problem. There is a growing phenomenon that somehow when you're in Europe and America, it feels like people say, okay, Chinese invasion of Africa. Understand one thing. If we look in Africa, people are looking for who is the partner who can work with, we can trade with, who is affordable. Mm-hmm. This is important. If you talk of EU-African trade, I don't know how many bananas come from Africa to Europe, from Africa. I don't know. Sometimes the African bananas are bent, and that is against the EU trade policy. The avocados which grows organic is spotted, and that's EU against EU trade policy. So let's be honest here and see, if it cannot be sold in Europe, should Africans not sell it to China? Should they not sell it to Middle East? I think they should do it. It's all about having a fair trade policies between the two continents. That will bring about transparency and operation with integrity, not this supremacy and inferiority issues. I think China is not an enemy to the continent. China will become an enemy, or will maybe impact more in the continent if we brand them as a threat to the continent. But let us see, how can we create an opportunity where Chinese are held responsible to play according to the standard by the African themselves, not being defined by Europe or American or something like that. And in a way, European market should be affordable to Africans. I think that's an important point. And then the question about whether we have bad leaders. Of course, not all African leaders are bad. They're both bad and good, even in one way or another. One dictator is also good in one way or another. But what I'm trying to say here, where is African Union in the global system? It's a regional bloc, but does it have the equal voice? In fact, maybe over 90% of the African Union budget is financed by European Union. That's not fair. What are we doing back home? We should be able to finance ourselves to be sustainable if we are looking for actual voice. But if we are looking for big father EU to finance our African Union operation, then do we expect to be independent? And then maybe Africa needs about 4 or 5 solid African leaders who can stand up to challenge fellow African leaders at African Union level, who can tell truth to themselves, not just about giving big speeches, brilliant speeches like the one which was given by the Ghanaian president, but what role is Ghana playing in the region? Crisis in the neighboring countries, are they maybe Senegal is playing more influential political region in the region than Ghana. He's a big talker, but how much is he playing to influence the situation in the region? So there's one being good, clean, big boy who can talk eloquently there, and you are not connected to the reality. But if you can have about 3 or 4 African leaders who are brave enough to challenge among themselves on how do we operate in a way that give us a better image than, looking for who should speak for us. I think it brings us to where, what about the tourism? What image do we have? So much potential exists in the continent. I think the best tourism for the continent would be potential of the new generation. If it's not about tourism, it should not be about animals, should not be about nature, should not be about what? That is it, nature is one of them. But where the potential? Recently, in the Olympic event in Brazil, imagine if all the Olympic gold medalists went back to their original countries. Africa would have taken 95% of the Olympic gold medals. But the rest were winning for Canada, the Somalis winning for Australia, for winning for Europe, for America. So the question is, what about the talents, local potential? Can we create potential locally so that African talent shines and thrives in the global space? But they don't, because war displaced them, and then they said, do you run well? We'll give you asylum. If you can't run well, you can't bring trophy to this country, you can't do that. So that's a very technical way of brain drain. So the best tourism is to shine on our potential as Africans, what we can do in the sports and arts, what we can do to explore and thrive on our nature. And politically, we should be able to be accountable to ourselves more than to the international communities. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I think this question about institutions is also, at the beginning, actually, this was called Africa-EU Summit, and it's always been like that. But I think in the summer or so, it's changed into African Union, European Union Summit. And I think this decision, as long as, of course, when you're talking about African Union in the sense of perhaps bringing more unity to Africa, that definitely would be, a good step. But the question, does the African Union represent African member states? I think it's also a different situation than it is in the EU. Of course, also knowing that it's not Slovenia obviously doesn't have the same influence within the EU as France or Germany, yeah? But I think in Africa it's also quite different. The African Union does not to equal amount represent our member states. So it's a question of institutional cooperation. And is institutional cooperation actually okay for the people? Does it represent the people? I think this is also another nuance of this question that should be thought.
Mm-hmm. I would like the question to be answered about an action plan.
Do you want to this question, because it was raised? I mentioned the African Union should be strengthened, and I think it's important in continuing what has been said. It's a question, of course, of the content. In the European Union, limited, but you have a European discussion of what is happening in Poland, in Hungary, or in other countries, and there is even sanctions possible. And therefore, I want to support what Victor said, that leaders and that could be the podium and the forum of the African Union, leaders should not be saying what is Mugabe doing is not our business, and what this dictator doing is not our business, but should discuss it at least, and maybe promote together with the civil society. I don't see the African Union in opposition, but in cooperation with the civil society, fight for more democracy and transparency and all these elements. I think that is important. And just one brief remark on China. China is not the enemy, but it should always be the Africans who should primarily define what is good for them and not somebody else. And the African Union, if it would be stronger, could have on an equal level discuss issues with China, with Europe, with America, whoever. That, I think, is the basic idea why I said African Union should be strengthened. But, of course, it depends always on the content, and the content should be the promotion of democracy, of independence, etc. So
I would like the question to be answered about action plan for the youth. And I think the lady also said either the diaspora or the Africans directly at home. Muna, can you answer to that question, or would you like to take over with that question?
Yes, of course, I can try to answer this question. I feel that, I mean, what should be strengthened is the cooperation between European young people and African young people. And I mean, this is why, for example, in the Youth Council adopted to have the Erasmus program to be the Erasmus Plus program, where you have also young Europeans spending some time in African countries in order to have to raise the conscious and the awareness. I feel that this contact should be much more deepened, but this is maybe one thing which I feel would be very important, and this kind of trying to come up with common projects is a good idea. I mean, there were ideas, for example, to have cultural centers, to have Olympic Games between Europe and Africa. So it was nice to hear all these creative ideas who came up from young people. And I mean, I just would like to, when I left this summit, I was still optimistic, because I felt that this younger generation is no longer accepting all this status quo. Thank you. And they are not willing anymore to accept this kind of conditions. And one main message from this young girl representing the Pan-African youth was, we want to stay in Africa. We want to stay in our countries, but we need to have prospects, we need to have access to education, we need to have jobs, and we need to have, for example, as well, which I was astonished about to hear, more entrepreneurship, more possibilities to be as well active in this field. And this is why I went back and I felt, okay, there is a new generation which is very self-confident and which would like really to change the situation. But I want just to say one point about this thing about institutions who are not, which are not representing the people in Africa.
Very short and snappy.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. The African Union is not comparable to the European Union, and it's always a difficult relationship. But until now, it was always like that. The European came, they were talking about the human rights violation in Africa, about the corruption, and the African head of states were talking about colonialism, responsibilities, and so on. And it was never a real dialogue, because, and I felt, nevertheless, with all the problems and with all the corruptions we have, but it's so important to get into a dialogue and to try to influence, of course, the political situation in the country. I was sitting next to the head of state of Angola and next to him Merkel, and I was listening to their conversation, and Merkel asked him how long he's in power now, and he said, yes, I'm the new head of state and so on. And then she asked him, how long was your previous head of state in power? And he said to her, 36 years. And then Merkel made the joke. She said, so you also will stay 36 years? And he said, no, this is not the case anymore. This finished already. I mean, and I felt, I mean, there are changes. And I think that this younger generation will not accept anymore such political situation and developments where people are in power for 40 years.
Thank you, Mina. YOUSSOUF, would you like to tie this into digitalization?
Not only digitalization, it was for her the digitalization. Yeah, the digitalization. I will start from there. It's really the key for development. We spend most of our time working on the digitalization in Africa, to focus on the rural area. I did a exercise when we were in Kampala. I asked them during the workshop, give me 5 reasons why I should stay in my village in Mali. There is no internet access, there is no schools, there is no infrastructures. How do you think that I can get married here, having my children and seeing on the TV that the others have better life? No. We need to create those needs there, and it is possible to do it. We don't know why it doesn't work. Each year, the European Union is giving 1 billion to boost connectivities in Africa. But it's up to the country to define the priorities they have. But we as a young people and civil society, we are trying to push them to use the money to this direction, because if we have connectivities, we'll be able, like digitalization, to boost our digitalization, creating companies, in the rural areas, and even being able to sell our product even more expensive than normal. How we can reach this is through investing, and there is money for it and capacity to do it. I think we should focus on this, the rural area. The role of diaspora, facing, I don't know, you were talking about the root causes, right, Otalia? I believe that we can play a big role. What we need to do is to keep, the awareness rising going on. We need to talk to our brothers and sisters, but we really lack infrastructures and means to do it. I know I like in the small group, taking another example. Like when I arrived in Wiener, okay, I've seen the opportunity to invite my sister as student to come, and we invite another sister. This is the way it works. You understand? Why? Because I'm making a nice selfie and sending back home. But when I got to know that this was really the narrative we should stop, I stopped doing it. I stopped sending money only like this to them. And I'm saying, let's do projects together. Let's try to develop things. Europe is not easy even for ourselves. I stopped even bringing big, large cages and all those stuff to my family back home, because it is not easy. I don't want another person from my family to be in the same situation many Africans are right now. It's not only a matter of a Mediterranean Sea. Life is really tough in Europe nowadays. That's why I really enjoy being the Plugging Initiative, seeing some similarities between Africa and Europe and how we can face all of those stuff. And the last point was from my friend from Pakistan. We cannot decide how the country should work. They are our representative, and it's up to them to say if they need the partners to invest or to give them the money to do. What happened in Congo 3 years ago, the Chinese came, they gave them $300 million, for a piece of land, What happened? After 1 year, they regret why they did it, because the value of the piece of land was more and more interesting than the price they paid for it. Those are things we really need to focus on it at the local level, to have our own think tank to develop strategy, to see how we can do things locally. The solution is only through through locally we can reach all those stuff, to see how we can have twin cities, like we said, as well. How the civil society of Austria can be partnered with some civil society in Mali, for example, to learn how things are going on here, to make sure that we'll make our decision maker accountable. This is the only way to do. And they are open now. We have ECOSOC at the African Union. And African Union, became the summit EU because of Morocco. We decided to join as well. So we have one voice. Once they will speak, we are behind them. They are our representative, and they represent fully Africa. We don't have the choice. We don't have other possibility, of course. You guys, you have the council, you have the external action services, you have more infrastructures, and they would like to go to those levels as well to make sure that the cooperation will be really strengthened, and then it will be a 50-50 partnership, like Mogherini said always. This is the first time we really reach that level, and we need to keep going on to make sure that things will be better for Africa, to make sure that we'll have China, we'll have India, to have more competitions. You know, only through competition will reach that point as well. Trying to renegotiate all the contracts Europe has in Africa and make sure that the international institution we are dealing in the rural area will pay more taxes. They will build schools, they will bring infrastructures, because this is their role to do that. But nobody is talking about that, because we have something they call ACP agreement. What is ACP agreement for Africa?
What is the ACP agreement?
This is the agreement, you know, for the globalization, to open our market. They can bring whatever they want to Africa and sell whatever they want. We can't complain, we cannot do anything. So we cannot produce at the end of the day.
It's the agreement between European Union and the African
Caribbean,
countries.
Pacific. It's not the European between us. They impose it. Even my Malian president, they took it away because he refused to sign it. It's the way things are going on. We need some time to speak loudly.
I want to take 2 more questions and then we're going to wrap it up, and then afterwards we will have the panelists available for you to ask any further questions. So, anyone? I will take the gentleman here at the back and the gentleman here with the glasses.
Thank you very much. Number one, thank you to the podium for these insightful discussions we've been having for the past 2 hours. First of all, I wanted to follow up on a point that was raised previously. Number one, digitalization. It's not only an enormous opportunity for Africa, but especially when we're talking about manufacturing, it also bears the possibility to be a great risk for Africa. When we're speaking about automation, when we're speaking about cheaper manufacturing taking place elsewhere, how is that going to tie into the African steamboat that drives the African manufacturing sector? The second point was already alluded to from my Pakistani neighbor over here, and it boils down to institutions. I think we've been talking past each other in some aspects when we're talking about institutions. On the one hand, institutions that pertain to international development relate to things such as property rights, relate to things such as accountability. How can we strengthen those on a granular level, on a local level, as Dr. Swoboda said, but also potentially on a digital level, as you said, Ms. Munar? On that note, I'm already looking forward to your answers.
Thank you. And the gentleman with the glasses here.
My name is Franz Schmidiel. I still want to thank, although it was at the beginning, Mr. Victor Orgen for this very inspiring, touching keynote. Thank you very much. And 2 points. A friend of mine, a Ugandan journalist, wrote several years ago, why refugees are not allowed to fly. And I think he addressed this question also to European leaders. Why we have 15, 18 years, I think the first time it was discussed in Tampere, no immigration and asylum system, a common one in the European Union. So that's a question maybe to Mr. Swoboda or Mr. Duzdar. And the second point is, we talked about leadership, African leadership, but we should also talk about European leadership, not only in the question of migration. The question is, how many decisions which are affecting the African continent are made on the continent, and which decisions are made in Europe or internationally? When we talk about development cooperation, around 31 billion a year from European Union member states are going to Africa, or at least part of them, part of it. But around 60 to 80 billion are leaving Africa through illicit flows, and they are going mainly to OECD countries. And the decision is made not in Africa about this money. So we should also address the structural issues and ask our European leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 very powerful questions. So the first one was about how automation may affect Africa. Then the second question was about, it skipped my mind. What was the second question? Do you know what to say? European leaders? Yeah, European leadership, how, and the asylum system. Correct. So he wants to answer first?
Yeah. First of all, the question of capital flows is right. If you look to capital flows, Africa is an exporting country of capital and not an importing country, net exporter. Of course, the decisions, decisions are not always taken in Europe. Of course, a Mali president can reject an agreement, but many people do accept an agreement. So this is again where I said the African Union should be stronger, because together they could say, look, this agreement is not correct. And I know, for example, some of the agricultural agreements, some of the fisheries agreement are not always very helpful. But I know perfectly well, for example, from Morocco, when we had this fishery agreement, and when it was first rejected in Europe, the Moroccans were very, very angry about it, and wanted to sever the relationship to Europe. And then, of course, we renegotiated and so on, and we came to an agreement. And I know perfectly well also from the agricultural agreement, especially now with North African countries, that everybody was for it, and we have to help the countries, we have to do something. And then, when I was leader of the group, the Spanish and partly of the French came to me and said, well, we are very much for the agreement in general, but because of our peasants and our farmers, we cannot vote for it, so please do it, but we have to vote against it. So of course we have also in Europe this kind of conflicts, that some of the export or promotion we would have from agricultural product, you know, in theory you're always for it, but then European representatives come and say, well, this is endangering our own economy. But it is true, and I think, and I only can want to repeat or to continue what Anna said, let's hope it is a start for changing this kind of unilateralism or this kind of imbalanced relationship between European Union and Africa. But without Africa being strong enough to demand it, it will not go, because normally, you know, people don't give, European politicians are not on the charity level, or it's not the Caritas, you know, giving you something, we are so good. But you have to demand it, and therefore I very much hope that Europe, that people will decide from Africa to be stronger on representing their own interests in relationship to everybody, Europe, China, whoever. Asylum system, you're absolutely right. We were fighting European Parliament again and again for common standards and common asylum system, including legal migration channels. Now, I'm not saying, you know, we could, all that was coming illegal, we can organize legally, because we also have our own problems and opposition. And I always say, look, for example, in Austria, we'll see what the next Austrian government, what kind of position they will have, without excusing the former governments, or Mona can tell about the difficult compromises she had to conclude with the other side. But if we don't manage it well, we will give a lot of voice to the opposition, to the right-wing, nationalistic opposition. And by chance today I heard the last the last speech of President Mitterrand, European Parliament, with a famous sentence, "Nationalism is war." And that's it. The nationalism starts new kind of wars, not only with weapons, but with words and walls and whatever. Last point, digitalization. Yes, the colleague is right. We don't know what digitalization will bring to our economies, and we don't know to the African economies. Therefore, if somebody said, well, we let everybody into Europe, because anyway we have a demand for jobs, which is true, but we don't know what is happening in 5 or 10 years. But on the other hand, I think we cannot avoid digitalization. As we saw, for example, in Eastern Africa, the digital way to pay and to have these transfers, it is helping. And we should use it in the way it is helping. And also, I think this is a colleague who is here thinking about digitalization also in the connection with agriculture. Even there, something can be done on information, on reacting to different climate changes and so on. So I think important is not to be afraid of it. Also, yeah, we see the danger, but always to be in the position to use also digitalization in a way to promote economic interest, small companies, because it's not the big companies who are saving Africa, not even Europe, but it's many, many small companies, and without digitalization, it would not be helpful, including also in the agricultural sector. And food safety for Africa is important. It's not us to deliver food, it's for the Africans themselves to produce enough food, maybe even export something to Europe.
If I can kind of intervene actually, because I can recall in the video, Youssouf, you mentioned how can you make agriculture sexy for the people or the youth in Africa to take up a position or an enterprise in this field. Did you come up with any conclusions? I think
the conclusion was to create the infrastructures we'll need to do it, to create incentives, attraction to young people to stay, like schools, like a connectivity, to be able to compare the prices, and other incentives to make sure that the young people will go and do agriculture. And the way we are doing agriculture is not the way our grandfather was doing it. As well, technology can make the difference. We used to invite a Nigerian agriculture. Young people is doing agriculture, is very famous, Williams. He was here recently. I've told him, I say, Williams, I really want to use your image to make sure that other young people will do agriculture. He has money, he has big cars. He's not like the African, dirty man going from, the field to home. I asked him, how can you value this sector? Because it's not about only machineries and all those things. It's to add some value, to make it valuable. Young people, agriculture, I'm proud of it. The mindset, first of all. Once we have the mindset and we have the technology and some incentive, we'll do agriculture. You know how many million they spend in the agriculture areas this year in Africa? A lot of money, European money, African Development Bank, even the Cotonou Agreement is trying to strengthen it, but it doesn't work because I'm not going, I'm a typical African man. To go, I need incentives, I need possibility to have a house like maybe not in Austria, but a decent place I can sleep, education for my family, technology, infrastructure, all those stuff, and make sure that at the end of the month, I will save some money as well. This is it's all about winning at the end of the game.
Thank you.
This is the conclusion we had, and we decided, during the meeting, head of state meeting, to create a window, for young people where they can apply getting funding for connectivities and being able to buy, digitalization tools, to starting doing agriculture in the rural area, and I think we are going to ask for 100 million at the beginning, both sides, Africa and Europe, and we'll see what is going to happen after that. I hope you will support the idea because it's from the European External Investment Plan, and all the head of state agree on it, and let's see what is going to happen after.
Thank you. I think we've reached the end of the panel now. It was really insightful. I would have welcomed more of your questions, but we've reached the end now. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you've managed to expand your knowledge on migration, the empowerment of youth, its importance, and what we can do here in Austria to assist. Thank you very much.